All right, so today we're going to bundle up
Oh, yeah.
and explore the world of aircraft de-icing, anti-icing.
Okay.
We've got some really fascinating sources here that I can't wait to kind of dig into.
Yeah.
Have you ever experienced one of those frustrating winter flight delays?
Oh, absolutely.
You know, chances are de-icing probably had something to do with it.
Yeah, it all comes down to this thing called the clean aircraft concept. You know, any contamination on those crucial surfaces, like
Yeah.
your wings, your tail, anything that affects airflow,
Yeah.
it can really spell trouble.
So you're saying a little bit of ice is more than just a little inconvenience?
sure.
It's like a real safety hazard.
Absolutely, yeah. Even a tiny amount of ice, something you might not even see from a distance,
Yeah.
can reduce lift by 30% and increase drag by 40%.
Wow.
Imagine trying to take off with that working against you.
That's like trying to fly a car with a parking brake on.
Yeah, pretty much.
Okay, so let's break this down. What kind of weather conditions are we talking about
Right.
that can lead to this, icing nightmare?
Well, you have your obvious ones, like freezing rain,
Right.
drizzle, fog.
Yeah.
But it's not just about what's falling from the sky.
Yeah.
Snow can also be a culprit, too.
Really?
And even high humidity combined with this thing called the cold-soaked fuel effect can cause icing.
Cold-soaked fuel. Okay, so that sounds kind of counterintuitive.
Yeah.
I thought warmer temperatures were kind of the problem here.
It is a little tricky.
Yeah.
Think about it this way, though. So the aircraft's wings, they can get chilled from a previous flight at high altitude, right?
Oh, okay.
Or maybe they were just refueled with fuel that's super cold.
Yeah.
So even if the air temperature is above freezing,
Right.
the wings themselves can be cold enough to cause icing.
Wow. That's something I never would have considered.
Yeah.
So we've got all this ice potentially forming on the aircraft.
Right.
But how does that actually impact a plane's ability to fly?
So an airplane's wings, all the control surfaces, they're designed with smooth airflow in mind.
Okay.
Ice disrupts that flow, which creates all sorts of problems. Loss of lift, increased drag, and potentially even control issues.
So it's like trying to swim with a bunch of seaweed wrapped around you.
Yeah, exactly.
You're not going anywhere.
And in the worst case scenarios,
Yeah.
ice buildup can make takeoff impossible or even cause the plane to stall shortly after takeoff.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's serious stuff.
Okay, I'm definitely starting to understand why this is such a big deal.
For sure.
Now let's talk about the different types of ice.
Okay.
Our sources mention clear ice, rime ice, frost, glaze ice.
Right.
It's like a whole frozen vocabulary.
Yep, there's a lot of different kinds.
So tell me about these.
Each type of ice has its own kind of unique characteristics. Like we already talked about clear ice.
Yeah.
And how it can be almost invisible, which makes it really dangerous.
Uh-huh.
Then you have rime ice, which is formed from these smaller, super cooled water droplets. Right.
And it gives it that rough kind of opaque look.
Interesting.
Frost is something we're all pretty familiar with.
Yeah, definitely.
You see that crystalline layer on your windshield on those cold mornings.
I was just scraping that off my car.
Exactly. And then glaze ice or rain ice is that smooth, clear coating that forms when freezing rain hits a surface.
So it's not just ice is ice.
Right.
Knowing these different types of ice actually helps those crews on the ground assess the situation
Absolutely.
and choose the best course of action.
Precisely. And speaking of courses of action,
Yeah.
let's move on to the main event, de-icing and anti-icing.
All right, this is where it gets interesting.
Yeah.
It seems like these are two distinct procedures,
Yeah.
even though their names sound very similar.
Right.
So tell me about de-icing first.
So de-icing is all about just removing existing ice.
Okay.
Think of it like hitting the reset button and getting those surfaces clean.
Okay, so getting everything back to a clean slate.
So anti-icing then is like adding that layer of protection
Exactly.
to keep that ice from coming back.
Yeah, anti-icing prevents that new ice from forming
Okay.
for a certain amount of time, giving the aircraft that crucial window to take off safely.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Our sources talk about two main methods for doing this. A one-step process and a two-step process.
Right.
What's the difference?
So one-step de-icing anti-icing, it uses a heated anti-icing fluid that does double duty.
Okay.
It removes the existing ice, and it also provides that short-term protection against new ice formation.
Okay.
It's usually used when conditions aren't too severe.
So two-step then is a little more thorough.
Yeah, exactly. So first, they'll de-ice with a heated fluid, and then they apply a separate anti-icing fluid for longer-lasting protection.
Got it.
So this is the method they usually use when the weather's really bad.
Yeah.
Throwing a curveball.
All right, so now let's get into the nitty-gritty of these de-icing and anti-icing fluids. I'm seeing references to type I, type 2, and type 4.
Yeah.
What's the deal with all these different types?
So each type of fluid just has different properties,
Well,
making it suitable for different situations.
yeah.
So your type I fluids, those are your standard everyday fluids.
Right.
Good for, light conditions,
Okay.
but they won't offer much protection if it's actively raining or snowing.
So they're like a light jacket.
Yeah,
Good for a chilly day,
right.
but not a blizzard.
Exactly. That's a great analogy.
All right, so then you've got type 2 and type 4,
Right.
which are thicker, more resistant to those heavier precipitation conditions.
Yeah, those are your heavy-duty winter coats offering that longer protection.
Okay.
Exactly.
Now, here's something I think is really cool.
Okay.
Our sources mention that the color of the fluid actually tells you what type it is.
That's right. So usually your type I is orange, type 2 is colorless or like a pale straw, and then your type 4 is green.
Wow, that's so interesting.
It's like a visual shorthand for those ground crews.
Yeah, I love those little details that just make things so much easier
I'm
for
saying.
everyone involved.
For sure.
Okay, so now we know about these different types of fluids, but I imagine this protection doesn't last forever, right?
You're right, and that's where the idea of holdover time comes into play.
Holdover time. Okay, that sounds important.
Yes.
What exactly does that mean?
So holdover time, or HIT, is the estimated time that anti-icing fluid is going to be effective.
Okay.
Think of it like a countdown clock.
Right.
Once it runs out, the aircraft is vulnerable to ice again.
So it's like a race against time.
Yes,
The
exactly.
crews apply the anti-icing fluid,
Right.
and the clock starts ticking.
Exactly.
And holdover time isn't just like a fixed number.
No.
It's affected by a bunch of different factors.
Right, like the type and intensity of the precipitation, the
Mhm.
temperature, the wind, and even just the concentration of the fluid itself.
Wow, so many variables to consider.
It's a lot.
It sounds like calculating holdover time is more of an art than a science.
Yeah, there's a lot of different things that go into it.
What happens if that holdover time runs out before the plane can actually take off?
That's when things can get a little tricky.
Oh, no.
Yeah, the aircraft would need to be de-iced and anti-iced all over again
Really?
before it could safely take off.
Wow.
Yeah.
So there's definitely no room for error here.
Definitely not.
But wait a minute, our sources also mentioned something called allowance time.
Yes.
What is that all about?
So allowance time is a specific concept that applies when we're talking about ice pellets
Right.
or small hail. Remember how we said ice pellets? They don't always behave like other types of precipitation.
Right.
They can be a little bit more stubborn.
Yeah.
So they don't always melt away in that anti-icing fluid like snow or freezing rain would.
Okay.
Instead, they kind of embed themselves in the fluid.
Oh, wow.
And that makes it harder to predict how long that anti-icing protection is going to last.
So allowance time is like a special consideration
Yeah, you could say that.
for those pesky ice pellets.
Precisely. It just provides a buffer to account for that unique behavior.
Okay, so it's basically saying, hey, we know those ice pellets are tricky, so we're going to give you a bit more leeway.
Exactly.
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm starting to wrap my head around that.
Good.
Now, one last thing before we move on.
Okay.
What about those pre-flight inspections?
Right.
I'm guessing those are more than just routine checks.
Oh, absolutely. Those inspections are vital.
Yeah.
They're like the last line of defense
Right.
against taking off with contaminated surfaces.
So it's all about making absolutely sure that everything is clear
Yes.
before that plane leaves the ground.
Exactly.
And there are two types of inspections, right?
Right. You have the pre-takeoff inspection, which is a visual check from inside the cockpit.
Okay.
And then you have a pre-takeoff check, which is a more thorough inspection from outside the aircraft.
So how do they decide which type of inspection to do?
It depends on the holdover time and the current weather conditions.
Okay.
If you're well within that holdover time window and the weather is fairly mild, a quick visual check from the cockpit might be all you need.
Gotcha.
But it's important to remember that even a thin layer of clear ice can be really hard to see,
Right.
so that pilot really needs to be paying attention.
So it's more than just a casual glance out the window.
Oh, for sure.
Okay.
And if there's any doubt at all, or if that holdover time is getting close to expiring, then they have to bring in the ground crew for that external pre-takeoff check.
Got it.
Yeah.
It sounds like they're always erring on the side of caution.
Yes, definitely.
Now, I have one more question
Okay.
before we wrap up this part of our deep dive.
Right.
Our sources mentioned something called an anti-icing code. What exactly is that?
So the anti-icing code is like a standardized language.
Okay.
It makes sure that everyone's on the same page when it comes to that aircraft's de-icing and anti-icing status.
So it's like a secret code that only pilots and ground crews know.
You could say that.
So what kind of information is actually in this code?
It includes information about the fluid type, the concentration, the time it was applied, and even the date.
So it's like a little passport for the aircraft,
Yeah, exactly.
detailing its de-icing history.
A perfect analogy.
And I imagine accuracy is super important here.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, one wrong number could lead to some serious problems.
Clear communication is non-negotiable when it comes to aviation safety.
Right.
One little mistake could have major consequences.
This whole deep dive is really highlighting how important those little details are.
They are.
Everything's so interconnected when it comes to aviation safety.
Yeah, that's the beauty and the complexity of it all.
Yeah.
Everything has to work together perfectly to ensure a safe flight.
Well said. We've covered a lot of ground in this first part of our de-icing and anti-icing journey.
We have.
We've explored the different types of ice, learned about those amazing de-icing fluids,
Yes.
and we've discovered the importance of holdover and allowance time. So stick with us as we continue to explore this fascinating world in the next part of our deep dive.
Yes, we're going to delve deeper into those pre-flight inspections,
Right.
those holdover and allowance time calculations, and a lot more.
Can't wait.
I'm looking forward to it.
From first officer to captain, master your airline command course. Are you ready to shatter the skies and take your aviation career to the next level? Whether you're just starting out or aiming for your airline command, Captain James is your ultimate co-pilot for success. With over decades of experience in both the Air Force and top airlines, Captain James has flown everything from fast jets and the P-3 to the Boeing and the Airbus, racking up countless hours in the sky. His unmatched insider knowledge and thrilling cockpit stories are packed into his best-selling Professional Airline Pilot series and his Skycall YouTube podcast. Buckle up. It's time to fly high. What you'll get is the Airline Command Prep course. You'll master the technical know-how, the standard operating procedures, and the leadership skills needed to take command of any flight. Next is the Airline Pilot Interview Manual. Nail your interview with insider tips, real-world scenarios, and expert strategies that will make you the top to pick. And finally, aircraft-specific guides that cover 600-plus technical questions for every aircraft. Become a pro on both the Airbus and Boeing. Get ready to impress with your technical knowledge and join Captain James on his Skycall YouTube podcast for exclusive behind-the-scenes access to the aviation world. From interview hacks to emergency handling, airline operations, and real stories from the flight deck. This is your personal seat in the cockpit. It's time to level up your skills and knowledge with expert insights and answers to your most burning aviation questions. Start your journey now with Captain James's books on Amazon Kindle. The QR code is on the screen and the links are below. This is your first-class ticket to a successful aviation career. Become the pilot you were meant to be, with Captain James by your side.
Welcome back to our deep dive into the world of keeping aircraft ice-free.
Yeah, it's fascinating how much goes into ensuring a safe takeoff when those temperatures plummet.
It is. There's this constant interplay between the weather conditions, the time constraints, and those specialized fluids we talked about.
Speaking of time, I'm still a bit curious about those holdover time calculations.
Let's see.
They seem pretty complex.
They are, yeah. The FAA has these incredibly detailed holdover timetables that take into account all those variables we mentioned, like the type of precipitation, how intense it is, the temperature, the wind speed. It's a whole matrix of factors.
It's like a giant multi-dimensional spreadsheet.
Yeah, exactly.
Like you're de-icing.
And those tables, they're always being updated. Oh, wow.
As researchers gather more data, gain a better understanding of how these factors all interact.
So it's a really dynamic process.
Very dynamic.
So it's not a one-size-fits-all approach.
Right.
It's all about adapting to the specific conditions at that moment.
At that moment, yeah.
And even with those detailed calculations, we're still dealing with estimations, right?
You are, yeah. There's always a degree of uncertainty.
That's where those pre-flight inspections become super crucial.
Absolutely.
So it's like that final check to make sure that anti-icing fluid is actually doing its job.
Doing what it's supposed to do.
Let's talk a bit more about those pre-flight inspections.
Okay.
We touched on the two main types.
Right.
The pre-takeoff inspection, which the pilot does visually from the cockpit, and then the pre-takeoff check, which involves someone physically inspecting the aircraft from the outside.
Correct.
So it seems like choosing between those two types of inspections depends on a few things, right? It does, yeah.
Like how much holdover time is left.
Right.
What the weather's doing at that moment.
Exactly.
So if you're well within that holdover time window and the weather's relatively calm, a visual check from the cockpit might be sufficient.
Could be.
But it's important to remember that even a thin layer of clear ice can be hard to see.
Very hard to see.
So that pilot really needs to have a sharp eye.
Absolutely. It's a very focused, systematic inspection.
So it's more than just a casual glance out the window.
Oh, for sure.
And if there's any doubt at all,
right,
or if that holdover time is getting close to expiring,
yeah,
it's time to bring in the ground crew.
Exactly.
For that external pre-takeoff check.
You got it.
Can you walk me through what that external inspection actually involves?
Sure. So during an external inspection, a trained inspector will physically touch the aircraft surfaces, feeling for any signs of contamination.
So they're looking for anything that could disrupt that smooth airflow we talked about.
Exactly, yep.
Ice, snow, even frost.
Anything, yeah.
It's like they're running their hands over the aircraft's skin, searching for any imperfections.
A great way to put it, yeah. They're using their sense of touch
Wow.
to get a true understanding of the aircraft's condition.
So what happens if they actually find something during that external check?
Right, so if they find any contamination, it's back to square one.
Really?
The de-icing and anti-icing process starts all over again.
Wow.
Yep. Safety is the top priority.
Of course.
And there's no room for compromise.
It's really impressive how much care and precision goes into every of this process.
It's a testament to the dedication and expertise of the people working behind the scenes to keep those flights safe.
Now let's circle back to that concept of allowance time.
Okay.
If I remember correctly, this applies specifically to those tricky ice pellets we discussed earlier.
You remember correctly, yeah. Ice pellets, they don't behave like other types of precipitation. They don't dissolve in the anti-icing fluid the same way that snow or freezing rain does.
Right.
Instead, they have a tendency to embed themselves in the fluid.
So it's like they're little stowaways hitching a ride on the aircraft.
Exactly.
That's a good way to put it.
And that makes it much more challenging to predict how long that anti-icing protection is actually going to last.
Yeah, of course.
That's where allowance time comes in.
So it's a way of acknowledging that ice pellets are a bit more unpredictable.
Precisely. Allowance time is essentially a safety buffer that takes into account the unique behavior of those ice pellets.
Okay, so how does that allowance time actually work?
Right.
Do they just add a few extra minutes to the holdover time?
It's a little bit more complicated than that.
Okay.
The FAA has specific tables for calculating allowance time.
Okay.
And those calculations consider factors like the type of anti-icing fluid being used, the temperature, and how intense that ice pellet precipitation is.
It sounds like they've got it down to a science.
They do. They're constantly refining the science to ensure the highest level of safety.
And if you recall, there's that 90-minute grace period that comes into play if the ice pellets stop falling before that allowance time runs out.
Exactly. So if those ice pellets decide to take a break and the allowance time hasn't expired yet, the aircraft has a 90-minute window to take off without needing to go through another round of de-icing and anti-icing.
Wow. So that's a pretty generous window.
It is.
But I imagine there are some conditions attached to it.
There are, yeah. So the temperature can't drop during that 90-minute period, and those ice pellets can't start falling again.
Right.
If either of those things happen, that grace period's over.
It's like a delicate dance with Mother Nature.
It is.
One wrong step and you're back to square one.
Exactly. It emphasizes the importance of constant communication and vigilance in this process.
Speaking of communication, I'd like to revisit that anti-icing code we talked about earlier. Why is that standardized communication so important?
It all comes down to making sure that everyone involved, the ground crew, the pilots, everyone has a clear and consistent understanding of the aircraft's de-icing and anti-icing status.
So it eliminates any room for misinterpretation or confusion?
Exactly, yeah. The anti-icing code provides a really concise summary of the treatment that the aircraft has received. The type of fluid, its concentration, the time of application, and even the date.
So it's like a little passport for the aircraft.
A great analogy.
Detailing its de-icing history.
Yeah, and just like a passport, accuracy is paramount.
Right. One wrong digit or a misunderstanding of the code could have serious consequences.
Absolutely.
This whole deep dive is really emphasizing the importance of precision and attention to detail in aviation.
Yes.
It's incredible how many factors they have to consider.
It's a lot.
To ensure the safety of every flight.
It's a complex and dynamic system, but it's a system that works thanks to the expertise and dedication of countless individuals.
Working together.
Working together, yeah.
So we've explored a lot of ground in this second part of our deep dive.
We have.
We've gained a deeper understanding of holdover time, allowance time, the critical role of those pre-flight inspections, and that all-important anti-icing code.
Absolutely.
And there's still more to uncover. Join us for the final part of our deep dive.
Yes, we'll wrap up this fascinating journey.
Okay.
And explore the broader implications of aircraft de-icing and anti-icing in a world facing new challenges.
Welcome back to the final part of our deep dive into aircraft de-icing and anti-icing. It's amazing how much we've learned about this hidden world that plays such a crucial role in aviation safety.
It is remarkable how much goes on behind the scenes. And as we've seen, it's a very complex system, you know.
Yeah.
So many different interconnected parts, from the science of those fluids to the precision of the procedures.
You know, I've experienced my fair share of winter flight delays. And after this deep dive, I have a whole new appreciation for what's happening out there on the tarmac.
Right.
When those delays occur.
Yeah, it's easy to take those delays for granted.
Totally.
That each one really represents this carefully orchestrated effort to make sure everyone on board is safe.
Absolutely. So for this last part of our deep dive, I'd love to kind of shift gears a bit and look towards the future.
Right.
What are some of the challenges that might impact de-icing and anti-icing procedures down the road?
That's a great question. There are definitely some significant challenges on the horizon. One of the biggest is climate change.
Okay.
As weather patterns shift and become less predictable, we can expect to see more frequent and intense icing events.
So it's not just about keeping up with, like, the current demands,
right,
but also preparing for a future where those demands could become even greater.
Exactly. It means investing in research and development of new technologies, finding more efficient and environmentally friendly de-icing fluids, and constantly refining those holdover and allowance time calculations.
It sounds like a constant race to stay one step ahead of Mother Nature.
In a way it is, but it's a race we can't afford to lose.
Yeah.
Because the stakes are just too high when it comes to aviation safety.
Right.
Another challenge is the increasing volume of air traffic.
Okay.
As more and more people take to the skies,
yeah,
the demand for de-icing and anti-icing services will only continue to grow.
So it's not just about the weather, but also the sheer number of aircraft that need to be treated.
Precisely. Airports and airlines will need to carefully plan and coordinate their operations, you know?
Yeah.
To handle that increased workload without sacrificing efficiency and, most importantly, safety.
It's like this giant complex puzzle with all these interconnected pieces that need to fit together perfectly.
A great analogy, yeah. And of course, we can't forget about the economic side of things either.
Right, yeah.
De-icing and anti-icing procedures, they are costly.
Of course.
Both in terms of the fluids and the time it takes to treat each aircraft.
So there's a strong incentive to find more cost-effective solutions without compromising safety or effectiveness.
Absolutely. Researchers are always working on new technologies, such as infrared de-icing systems.
Wow, that was interesting.
And exploring ways to optimize fluid formulations to reduce both cost and environmental impact.
That's encouraging to hear. It sounds like there's a lot of innovation happening in this field.
There is.
Well, as we wrap up our deep dive, I have to say, I'm really impressed by the level of expertise and dedication that goes into, keeping our skies safe.
Right.
During those icy winter months.
I agree. It's a testament to human ingenuity and our determination to overcome those challenges that nature throws our way.
Yeah.
And as we've learned, it's a constantly evolving field with new technologies and strategies being developed all the time.
So before we sign off, is there one final thought or question you'd like to leave our listener with, something to ponder as they head out into the world?
Here's something to think about. Now that you have a deeper understanding of how critical and intricate these de-icing and anti-icing procedures are, how do you think we can ensure their effectiveness and sustainability in the future? In a future shaped by climate change, increasing air traffic, and rapid technological advancements.
That's a great question. It's a challenge that will require collaboration, innovative thinking, and a steadfast commitment to safety. And who knows, maybe our listener will be part of the solution.
That'd be great.
Developing the next generation of de-icing technologies or finding ways to optimize these really crucial procedures.
Yeah, the future of aviation safety depends on constantly pushing the boundaries of knowledge and innovation.
Well said. It's been an incredible journey exploring the world of aircraft, de-icing, and anti-icing. Until next time, thanks for joining us on The Deep Dive.